Hello, my name is Jeffrey Booth and welcome back to the Stories for My Lights YouTube channel, where I tell ridiculous improvised stories meant for children or people like me who have a supremely tiny brain and need simple, easy to digest stories. Now today we're coming back with part 3 of the story, Craig and the Magic Deck. Now if you haven't seen part 1 or 2, you can look down below in the description. I will link them for your viewing pleasure, or more likely, your viewing displeasure. Now let us resume our story. If you recall, Craig had just emerged into a giant chamber that was filled with giant, insurmountably large drills, caves that seemed to go off into the distance for a purpose he could not discern, and pools of magma. Craig crept up to one of the machines as quietly as he could, darting from one rock to the next, hiding and proceeding. He didn't know what was happening or what these machines were for, but he just knew deep in his heart, deep in his gut, that he needed to investigate. Finally, he made it to one of the giant shredded wheels on one of the machines, climbed upon it, and peeked inside. There was nobody inside. There were no keys, no evidence that this machine had been used in some time, but he could clearly see through all of the holes drilled in the cavern outside that something was going on, and that these machines were being used, and he suspected for no purpose that he would like. He got out of the machine, and he ran and snuck and crawled to the next one, and he found the same. Nothing inside. No keys, no clothes, no weapons, no remnants of who or what might be there. He actually did this for all 7 of the machines. There were several earthquakes that shook and rumbled around, but nothing like the ones he had previously experienced. Finally, as he got to the 7th machine and he looked inside, he saw something sitting on the seat. It looked like a giant fish scale. He opened the door, surprisingly it wasn't locked, and he picked up the scale and he looked at it. He wasn't sure if this was from a fish, perhaps a reptile, or some other scaled creature, but it was thick, it was strong, and it was green, but if it caught the light the right way, it had sort of a rainbow hue to it. He climbed out of the machine and he ducked down and stood by one of the treads. He looked around. He didn't know what to do or where to go next. The tales he had read of the heroes fighting with armor and sword and the cards of power were running through his mind. Could he be such a hero? Why him? Why had they led him down here? What had led him down here? More importantly, what had stopped time up on the surface? Well, he was going to get an answer to this question sooner than he liked, because out of the blue, he heard a sudden sound that to him was like this. And just like that, he could hear far off, popping from the lake of magma. He could hear bubbling. He could hear the sound of wind soughing through the caverns below him. He realized that time was no longer stopped. Oh, sorry about that. I did the best I could. Craig jumped and he spun around, and there before him was something that he never imagined to see. Now I know most of you probably have an image in your mind of what a dwarf looks like. Kind of short, kind of rotund, probably has a beard, might have some sort of hat on, perhaps armor. This creature looked exactly like a dwarf, but it was only maybe 6 or 7 inches tall, and it was floating around on top of what appeared to be a cloud that was raining down some sort of magical dust. Who are you? Craig asked. Well, let's just not worry about names. You know, those aren't important here. What is important is that I can't stop time anymore. I'm out of magic, and they will be coming, and you had better run. Wait, who's gonna be coming? Craig asked. Well, you know, the ancient ones, the ones who did this. And he pointed all around the cavern, pointing to the drilled machines into the faraway caves in the distance. Where do I go? Craig asked. Well, that's for you to decide. You know, we're never supposed to help the chosen ones because they know what they're doing. They're here for a reason, and we might just mess it up. I just wanted to warn you, I won't be able to help you anymore. Goodbye. And the gnome creature snapped, and there was a burst of vapor and smoke and a few sparkles, and then he was gone. Craig did not want to tempt fate, so he started running for the nearest cavern. He had no idea why he had chosen that cavern, or mine, or whatever you call the holes that these giant machines were drilling. But he had a feeling, and so he did. Now, as he was running, he heard behind him voices. They were quiet. They were far away in the distance, but it did not take him long to recognize they were not human. They were low and raspy. He could understand the words, but almost there was an undertone of small rocks rubbing together. Kind of like that, but I cannot make the noise that well. He did not want to wait and find out what these things were, so he ran into the cavern. And he was shocked, because as he got inside, the enormity of these caverns filled him with awe. He was almost appreciative of any creature that could mine such a large, smooth tunnel through solid earth. He kept running. He didn't see anything. There was no side caves. There were no stalactites or stalagmites. There was only the smooth, chiseled away stone and him. As he got farther along the tunnel, the light which the hot magma above provided began to slowly fade. And the only thing that provided any sort of visibility for him were small torches that were mounted to the walls every 200 feet or so. By the time he would run from one torch to the next, in between, it would be almost pitch black. He looked at these torches, wondering one thing. Were they some sort of technology or magic that allowed them to burn for a very, very long time? Or did something or someone have to come through these caves and consistently light these torches? He decided he didn't want to find out. He ran and walked and ran and walked for quite some time. It felt to him like 10 hours, but he had no way to tell the time underground. But he could tell that the cave seemed to be spiraling down in a corkscrew pattern, deeper and deeper into the earth. After a time, he had to stop and get some food and water for his backpack. And so he did so, eating and drinking as quietly as he could, ducking into the most shadowed place available in the tunnel. He had a brief panic as he thought he heard footsteps coming his way. But after he sat quietly for a time, the sound disappeared. He didn't know where they were because the echoes in these caverns and caves and tunnels did strange things. But it motivated him to get his backpack on and run further down the tunnel, deeper and deeper and deeper, for what felt like more hours. Though he didn't know how much time had passed, he could tell that his body was tired. His legs were aching and his feet were aching. And so when he came down to the very bottom, where the giant machine was parked, he felt a sense of relief. But then he felt a sense of terror, for he heard the door at the side of the machine opening, and then he heard one of the raspy voices and the sound of it closing again. He didn't even have time to try to look what was inside. He sprinted as quickly as he could, dove under the machine, and made himself crouch into the smallest ball he could in the deepest recess of the shadow. He heard footsteps, only one pair. It sounded like flesh smacking on the stone floor. He realized whatever this creature was, it wasn't wearing shoes. And when it walked in front of the drill, he momentarily caught sight of green feet covered in scales with long, dark claws protruding. And he wondered, was this the green creature he had seen before? The feet looked bigger. The ankles looked more muscled than he had imagined. And that creature had seemed to wish him no harm. But this creature gave him a grave sense of foreboding. It mumbled something in a guttural, scary language he didn't understand. And then he heard the footsteps receding slowly up the cavern from whence he had just come. After he had gone about 10 minutes without hearing a sound, not the wind, no dripping of water, not even the faraway bubbling of magma, he slowly emerged out from underneath the giant drill where he had hidden himself. He looked around. He opened the machine and looked inside. He saw nothing. Whatever these creatures were, they were quite clean and they didn't leave any of their paraphernalia behind. He got out and he walked around to where the tip of the drill was pointing. He saw something he didn't expect. You see, he expected to see more stone, but the drill seemed to have stopped on metal. In fact, he could see that the tip of the drill was bent and mangled, whereas the metal it was pressed up against had not a scratch upon it. He wondered, almost in amazement. What sort of metal could resist a drill that could go through the earth with such ease as these had? He knocked on the metal. It sounded very thick. It was not hollow. He couldn't hear anything. He picked up a stone and tried to scratch whatever this material was. No matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't leave even the barest of surface scratches. He wondered what the metal was and why these drills couldn't get through it. He sat down and he looked at it, and then it occurred to him. The cards of power, his deck. He opened the deck up and he thumbed through it. And he found something that at first he had thought was a knife slicing through some sort of food. But now that he looked at it, it almost looked like a square block of metal, and a knife were carving it, and it looked as if it was parting, as if someone were cutting butter. He took the card out, and he put it up to the metal in front of him, and he tapped it, and the card began glowing. And he pushed it, and much to his surprise, without any resistance whatsoever, it pierced through the solid steel, and he carved down. And then he carved the top and the other side, and then the bottom. And when he had a rectangle cut, he tried to push it. But of course this metal was far too heavy for a boy of his size to push, though he did try his best. But then he remembered he did have another exploding card left. So he took it out, took a step back, and threw it as hard as he could at the rectangle he had cut out of the metal. There was a billow of smoke, dust flew everywhere. A piece even hit him in the eye and made his eye water. Fortunately, he didn't become permanently injured. Once the dust cleared, he looked and he had saw that the metal door had tipped over, and he walked inside. He was not expected to see what was inside. You see, he had thought to see another cavern, perhaps a fort, computers, but what he saw looked like an armory of old. There on the wall was hanging armor. This was the shiniest armor he had ever seen. He went and he picked over a piece of gauntlets, which is armor that you can wear in your hands. It was light as a feather. He remembered the book he had read in the cathedral, the armor, the weapons of old. He grabbed some leggings and put them on, and he was surprised to find that after he had them over his legs, they seemed to gently tighten to him. And then they moved and flexed, just as if he were wearing sweatpants. He did the same with his boots. He did the same with the gloves. He did the same with the shirt. And finally, he grabbed a helmet, which tightened around him but left his face open. He could move around as if he were wearing nothing. He punched himself in the stomach to see if he could feel it. The armor completely absorbed any blow that he could have possibly felt. Could these strange creatures have been trying to get such powerful armor? He did not know, but he did know that he didn't want them to have it. He walked over to the other wall where a vast array of weapons were waiting. Upon it hung halberds and axes, swords, maces, morning stars, spears, battle axes, everything he could think of. He saw a short sword that looked just the perfect length for him, and he grabbed it, and he was surprised to find that this too was light as a feather. He too grabbed a shield, once again light as a feather, and strapped it to his back. He walked outside of the doorway and looked around. He could hear footsteps coming. Oh no, if he didn't do something, they were going to find this chamber, and they were going to get the weapons, and he just knew, somewhere in his heart, somewhere deep in his soul, if these creatures were to get weapons of this kind, they would do no good with them, and perhaps a perilous and grave harm. He looked through his deck. He tried to find something that could help, and then he did find something. The card showed a person standing up against a tree, and the person appeared to be blending in the tree, while creatures, who looked of an evil sort, stood nearby, clearly not noticing this person. He hoped it were some sort of camouflage card. He ran outside, he took the card, threw it at the doorway, and much to his surprise, there was a shimmer, and then it looked as if it were a flat surface of metal. He himself ran back underneath the drill and ducked. He waited. This time he heard multiple footsteps. He heard two of these creatures garbling in a language he couldn't understand, and then one of them said,
"Everything looks fine here. We're best go check the other tunnels. We must have heard wrong."
The other two garbled again in a strange language. Before long, they were gone. Craig sat underneath the drill, trying to understand what possibly could have happened. This story seemed almost unbelievable. How did he know which path to go down? How had he gone inside? How was this armor, that clearly was magical, able to fit to him perfectly? He didn't know. But what he didn't know and what scared him the most is, now that he had this armor, what was he supposed to do? Clearly these creatures were causing these earthquakes, and he knew, once again deep in his soul, that were he not to put a stop to it, people up top would start getting hurt, buildings would start falling over, cities would collapse, and who knows what else. So he laid there for a time resting because he was very tired. He even managed to nod off for a few moments. And he knew that when he awoke the next morning, he was going to have to face a challenge the likes he had never faced before. Well, that was part 3 of Craig and the Magic Deck. This may not have seemed to be the most exciting part, but in every hero's journey, there's a moment where he not only comes to terms with what he must do, but also gets the tools he will need. And now Craig, whether he accepts it or not, knows his mission, and now he has armor, magic cards, and a brand new sword that he can face the dangers with. I love you, Alden. You are my best friend, and you will always be in my heart, and I hope you have an excellent sleep tonight.